Welcome to the Mommy Chronicles with Denise Davis May and Tanya Scott Williams, your partners in raising phenomenal children. Hi. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Are you sure? Look at how far down we are.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Just because y'all are not statuesque.
Oh my. Did we really go there? Hello everyone.
Hey,
It's Tanya, Denise, and Dr. Derryn Moten.
Y'all
We're
come
gonna-
on. Why is my phone like self? Did you see where it was?
Yeah, kind of zooming in and out.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's some new technology for the
I don't
Android.
know. Well, I have the 9X, so it probably is.
Excuse me, who do we have here? We have Charity.
Christy.
Chris,
Don't you try to read anybody's name. Christy Curry.
I'm going to go ahead and apologize to y'all. I had everything this morning packed, left my glasses. So,
Please don't read anyone's name.
so Denise will handle the greetings. I'm just telling y'all that in advance.
This is where my binoculars come in handy.
Now, thankfully, I had the presence of mind to put my notes in very large font, and even with that, I'm having to struggle, but that's all right. I got support, good support here this morning.
No, do you want to tag Karen Rogers in the video?
Sure. Is she there?
I don't know.
That's. Hi,
See, this is
hi
too
Karen.
much-
I know this is
Too
something.
much information.
No, well, I think that's it. No, I won't do that. Some people don't like to be tagged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. All right.
We have a couple of minutes. We're just giving people time to come on.
Hey,
and
now I
join
see
us.
Cheyenne's name. Hey, Shy.
Hey, Miss Riceberg, how are you?
Good morning.
Yeah. Everybody, come on in the room.
Exactly. If you haven't guessed already or seen in all of our promotions, we're at Alabama State University and we're in their fabulous bookstore. Yes, with our wonderful favorite shirts behind us.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to cop that one.
Yeah.
Yes, it'll match my palazzos that are gold, and I can wear it to class next week.
Her palazzos that are
Yes.
gold.
Hey, Mr. Carl, how are you?
Whereas I'm gonna get one of them clearance shirts over there. And I'm gonna put my own beads on it. I'm gonna put my own sparkle on it.
See, I don't have that kind of skill. It'll look a hot mess.
We're really happy to be back today. And let us know if anything's wrong, like if you can't hear us, we need to speak up. Let us know.
If we're upside down, that is our signature.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I like about our show. We're so real.
Yeah, sometimes too real.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
But please do let us know if you can hear us. Make sure that the volume is good. We're so used to using our computers and kind of having that access that sometimes we don't speak loudly enough. But we are in this cavernous bookstore, so we know that we're going to have some competition with the noise and folks on their cell phones talking, having whole discussions. So we just want to make sure that you all hear us. Mal, can you hear us well? Cheyenne, can you hear us well? Let us know if the volume isn't what it needs to be, so that we can kind of speak more loudly if necessary.
Yeah. And show us some love. Give us some hearts on there. Let us know that you're with us.
Yeah.
Cassandra, I think that's Cassandra. Did I read that right?
Yes,
There's
yes,
Sandra's. Hey, Cassandra, how are you? And I can really see yours because it's farther away. That says Marilyn McCall, right?
Trying to be cute and not keeping her glasses on.
Well,
Yes.
that happens sometimes.
Yes.
And-
it's fun to be cute.
Was that shade?
No.
You know, I have a hard time picking up on stuff.
No, it was not shade. It's fun to be cute. I am so far past cute.
No, she's always cute. But, and then also, of course, this will task Denise, if you want to ask a question, just keep it brief, type a quick question to us, and we'll ask Dr. Moten, putting him on the spot completely, but he's always ready. And we'll
Scholar.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh my gosh, I'm really excited that you've given us this privilege to talk to you about this book today.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
This is very exciting.
Yeah, good stuff.
What time? Where are we on time?
About 5
Okay.
Look how dapper.
I know.
A man still wearing a watch.
I know, it's something about it, right?
Okay.
bow tie, the watch, and y'all need to check his shoe game.
Oh,
His
goodness.
shoe game is
Tight.
awesome.
Tight.
Yes, I looked at that picture that you and Denise took last month here at the
Right.
bookstore,
Right.
and I was telling Lydia, I said, we'll be interviewing Dr. Moten tomorrow. And then the way she remembered you is, she says, oh, the one with the locks. Yes, I said, yes, Dr. Moten, and he is always so sharp and dapper. And I said, his shoe game is awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, so I noticed that in that picture with you and Denise.
Yeah, I think someone from California mentioned that you were a true gentleman. I think you had on your Havana.
Oh, yes, yes.
Hat. What? It's called something specific. Oh goodness.
Which one?
The kind of
Was it the white
Cuban.
hat or?
Yes.
Yes, that's, yeah, I guess Cuban.
Okay. Yes, but it was just. She said, "Oh my goodness, what a gentleman!"
I know, right?
Like he's married and a grandpa.
Yes.
Exactly.
Very married.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, I think yeah. Anyway. So we have about 2 more minutes. Y'all go ahead and tag somebody, share the live so we can get some more folks in. Y'all do not want to miss this. We're gonna share it later, but you want to hear it in real time, and you also want to be able to ask some questions. You can just type right in, and we will will respond. I can see, and I will read both of them.
I know that was shade. I know that was shade. I felt that.
With the sisters, you know I'm not shady with my sisters. And
Okay.
so we have some time, about 45 minutes to share, and we'll be starting in a couple of minutes. So y'all go ahead and share the video. Let us know that you're sharing it, and tag some folks who would be interested in history, any ministers out there who have any connection to Dr. King, any of the alums of Alabama State University, of Morehouse College, of the Atlanta University Center, Howard University. Y'all go ahead and bring them in. Hey, sweetheart. Hey, Queen, how are you? If you know anyone who has any interest in history, any interest in Dr. King's legacy, any interest in the legacy of Morehouse and the Atlanta University Center, of Howard University, I'm trying to think of Lincoln University. Y'all just go ahead and tag them. This is going to be very interesting, and I want you all to kind of really understand the impact of this book, Crusader Without Violence. And so we'll go ahead and get started.
I'm Tanya Scott Williams.
And I'm Denise Davis May.
And you're listening and watching, rather, a special edition of the Mommy Chronicles. We are live at Alabama State University in the bookstore, and there is a reason for this today. Crusader Without Violence, the first biography of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., returns to critical acclaim. Long out of print, this is a powerful account of Dr. Lawrence Dunbar Reddick, of the dynamic leader who emerged from the 1955-1956 Montgomery bus boycott as the spokesman of the 20th century American civil rights movement. New South Books' 60th anniversary edition with a new introduction containing new biographical details about its author returns to general circulation. It's a valuable, rare, and engaging telling of Martin Luther King Jr. before he became an American phenomenon.
And so today on the Mommy Chronicles, we have here with us the venerable Dr. Derryn E. Moten, who is the champion of the new edition, who also penned the introduction of Crusader Without Violence. Dr. Moten is a native of Gary, Indiana. Go Gary.
Yes.
And he is also an alum of the University of Iowa, where he studied both American Studies and library science at Catholic University. But most importantly, he is an alum of the real HU. Y'all Hampton folks, don't get angry. But he is an alum of Howard University in Washington, D.C., where he received his Bachelor of Arts many years ago. And so we're thrilled to have Dr. Moten, who is also a professor of history and the chair of the Department of History and Political Science here at the Alabama State University. His introduction of Dr. Reddick's biography of King puts into context Dr. King's life, I think, in a way that I've certainly not seen in other biographies, and frankly, even in autobiography. It seems to be more personal, more intimate, and so he was forced. Dr. Reddick was to leave his teaching, to leave his job here at Alabama State University, and that in and of itself is, I think, important for us to discuss. And so, Dr. Moten, we want to welcome you to the Mommy Chronicles.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So, given some of our university's recent experiences with state oversight and some of the overreach, I think, the analysis of the 1960 interjection of the then Governor Patterson and his forcing the Board of Education to fire Dr. Reddick, I think is eerily familiar. And so what is your take on that and its connection?
Yeah, well, I have several sort of responses to that. One is just the draconian nature of government in Alabama at that time. And the other part is the harm that was done to staff, faculty, and students at this university with seemingly no regard to their livelihoods, to their well-being. And so the governor, that is Governor John Patterson, and the Alabama State Board of Education really turned people's lives upside down. So it's chilling, you know, when you go to look at the papers of Governor Patterson at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. There is a section for Dr. L.D. Reddick, and in that is a investigation that was conducted of Dr. Reddick by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and there's a fingerprint card in his file. And you know, today we hear words like deep state and things like that. Well, when I read about what happened to Dr. Reddick and Professor Mary Fair Burks and Professor Joanne Robinson and Professor Robert Williams, to me, that is very much the embodiment of a deep state.
And all of those faculty members were fired because of their participation in the bus boycott, or the preparation of the bus boycott for the Montgomery Improvement Association.
Well, you know, the evidence that we have really does not, other than for Dr. Reddick, indicate why they were terminated. Dr. Reddick was terminated by the State Board of Education for allegedly being a member of the American or the U.S. Communist Party, which he was not. Dr. Reddick argued that he was terminated because of his biography of Dr. King and his support of the sit-in student demonstrations. I believe that. We don't know why Mrs. Burks and Miss Robinson and Mr. Williams were forced to leave the university. I suspect that they were forced to leave the university, one, because of their friendship with Dr. King and his family. Two, because Mary Fair Burks and Joanne Robinson were founding members of the Women's Political Council. Well, I should say Mary Fair Burks was a founding member of the Women's Political Council. Joanne Robinson at the time was the president of the Women's Political Council at the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott. And so, you know, at the beginning of the boycott, Governor John Patterson was then Attorney General Patterson. And, you know, this is the same gentleman who made it illegal for the NAACP to actually operate in the state of Alabama. And so this harassment, if you will, has a long history in terms of the relationship of Governor Patterson and then Attorney General Patterson with these individuals.
And so as we are moving into this period now of midterm elections,
Right.
and the level at which several organizations are being surveilled,
Right.
I think sometimes we forget
Right.
that this isn't new,
No.
that this is the legacy of this place,
Yeah.
and so we ought not be surprised. So to be able to review, because of your promotion of the reintroduction of this biography, to go back and just to recognize the legacy. So, we think we know a lot because we read a lot, and but to go back and to see this told right through Dr. Reddick's interpretation
Right.
of Dr. King's life
Right.
is amazing.
And I think it's also important to emphasize or to stress, but these were good people. I mean, they were really good people. Mrs. Mary Fair Burks was recognized by Alabama State College in 1958 for being an outstanding teacher. She actually received a plaque from the school. That plaque is right now, in the archives of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And less than 2 years later, she was forced to leave the university because the governor alleged that she was disloyal to the state of Alabama and disloyal to Alabama State College.
Back to Governor Patterson, I read that shortly after Dr. Reddick was forced out, others were forced out, their lives completely disrupted, he received a letter from the head of the Klan, basically thanking him
Yes.
for taking action.
Yes.
So you talk about, interesting bedfellows.
Yeah.
And history repeating itself.
Right,
Yes.
So
right.
that's what I'm
Right,
getting from
right.
this.
Yeah.
Is if everyone
Right.
would read this
I
biography.
mean, it will be familiar.
Right, and the tumult in our state, because everybody knows about Governor Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door, his inauguration where he talks about segregation now, tomorrow, and forever. People forget that Arthur and Lucy was the first black person to desegregate the University of Alabama, and she did that in 1956. So this reign of terror has, as I said, a long stretch. And it's chilling to take into account the long reach of the state government. And Governor Patterson had everything at his fingertips. The state police, although they weren't called the state police, they were called Department of Public Safety. The investigative wing of that section, and even the FBI. The FBI, we know that the FBI was here in Montgomery as early as the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott.
My goodness. I think I can read on my screen, if you with us at the beginning, I left my glasses, but I think I can see KK Middleton says to you, Dr. Moten is a great mentor and
I appreciate
Denise?
that.
Professor? Okay. I mean, I can read, but so much.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you for that, for that, KK. And I'm going to try to stay on point, but you kind of got me excited because I was thinking about a mini doc that I listened to this morning about folks whose lives are being disrupted through the use of law enforcement, especially with this new black nationalist terrorist watch list that was created, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, or it came along that timeline.
We know that he promoted it. I'm not sure.
So I'm not sure who started it, but that is a continuation of what has long existed.
Yeah, I mean, in Mississippi we had the Sovereignty Commission. In Alabama we didn't have a Sovereignty Commission per se, but I certainly think we had some clandestine operation of the state law enforcement that or not only on this campus, but also surveilled Dr. King, Dr. Reddick, and others. And, you know, we're still ferreting out, trying to figure out, you know, what type of information was gathered on these individuals. But I think it's reasonable to assume that these Dr. Reddick, Dr. King, Mary Fairburks, Joanne Robinson never lost the attention of the state law enforcement.
Wow. If you're just joining us, I'm Tanya Scott Williams.
And I'm Denise Davis May.
And we are interviewing this morning, pardon my hand here, have mine set not to go up, but we're interviewing Dr. Derryn Moten. He wrote the introduction to Dr. Reddick's biography of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is called Crusader Without Violence. And try not to get too far into the book because we want y'all to read it for yourselves, but Denise is absolutely right in that some things will be familiar, but it is also wonderful that we get this look into Dr. King's life in a way that we might not experience through other books. After graduating from Morehouse in 1948, at the time, Martin Luther King Jr. Moves to Pennsylvania, where he enrolls in Crozier Theological Seminary to begin his professional training. And so there he made a number of impressions on the faculty, on the presidents of the university. One was transitioning when he got there, and then he also fell into good graces with the other. And in fact, one of the faculty members even noted in a letter about young Martin Luther King that King seems to know where he wants to go and how to get there. But in fact, at that time, Martin King was on a search, quite honestly, on a search for an answer to how to find this thing called nonviolent protest in some way. And he happened to come across or cross paths with Dr. Mordecai Johnson, who was the president of Howard University. So it was through that encounter, because Dr. Johnson had traveled India, he had been on this pilgrimage, following in Gandhi's path, and suddenly he and Dr. King meet. Tell us what happens from that encounter.
Well, Dr. King had several encounters with Dr. Mordecai Johnson, who, by the way, was also a Morehouse graduate and the first black president of Howard University. And Dr. King had met Dr. Johnson at Crozier, but he also heard him speak at Morehouse. And so a lot of people think that Dr. King was introduced to nonviolent passive resistance here in Montgomery. He actually had been introduced much earlier, but it was here in Montgomery that he actually was able to apply what he learned. And I marvel at the fact that people were willing to give this a try. You know, when Dr. King told people, we're not going to resist. We're not going to strike back. I remember Dick Gregory saying once, jokingly, that the first time he heard Dr. King said, "Well, if a man strikes you on your left cheek, you turn your face and offer him your right cheek." And Dick Gregory said, he was in the audience, and said, "That Negro's crazy."
Sure, a lot of people are thinking that.
So, but
Yes.
but I think Dr. King understood that it would have been so easy for people to resort to violence, and if there had been, if people had resorted to violence, there would have been a bloodletting in this city and other places. It's something that we should never forget, I think, about the modern civil rights movement. Is in one of my favorite quotes by Malcolm X. Malcolm X once said that there's no such thing as a bloodless revolution. And what we should not forget, I think, about the Montgomery bus boycott and the modern civil rights movement is that it was not a bloodless revolution. People shed blood.
Yes.
And they lost lives. And so this is not about martyrdom or anything. This is about people recognizing if they were going to do this work, they were going to put themselves in harm's way, and yet they were still willing to do that.
I think about the sacrifice, especially as I was reading through the book and these chapters in particular. I think about the sacrifices that are lost to history, and how in this book we are reminded of that. And you're pointing out the bloodshed. We forget about that. I mean, these are everyday folk, people going to church, going to work, neighbors, folks you bump into in the grocery store. These are people who decided that they were going to put themselves in harm's way for greater good. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice?
And not for their personal gain.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was
Oh,
not
no.
for their personal gain. And you know, when I have conversations with students about the civil rights movement, I tell them that they weren't seeking special rights. They weren't seeking special privileges. They wanted to be treated as full-fledged citizens of this country. And so what they were trying to accomplish is make the Constitution real for everybody,
Right.
not just for some people.
Exactly. And when I ask the question, what are you willing to sacrifice? I'm asking that of myself. I mean, what you think about losing a job. Let's just say you weren't physically harmed, but you lost your means to provide for your family. What does that mean? And for some people, they had to literally leave town because no one would hire them.
Absolutely.
So, disrupting their education and all of these things, these things are not small.
Yeah.
And how do you quell that anger?
Oh,
right?
gosh.
How do you
Yes,
quell that anger?
yes.
So nonviolence is not without violence.
Right,
right.
Violence
Right.
upon yourself,
Right.
Yes.
violence upon your psyche, violence upon your
Wow.
spirit. So
Wow.
how do you quell that anger and to consider that this philosophy, so not just Gandhian, because I know some stuff
Yeah.
now, right? But
Right.
so not just Gandhian, but the idea that recognizing as blacks as Africans in America, right, that we had to figure out how to navigate this place,
Sure.
to which we were foreign,
Sure.
right,
Sure.
and do that in spite of all of the violence enacted upon us,
Right.
and to do that, to finally get to the point to say that the intellect that I've been graced with, I'm going to utilize that because I can think around you, right? I can think around your resorting to violence.
Right.
I can figure that out.
Right.
And I think again, those are the lessons. Those
Yes.
are the lessons
Yes.
that come from this. And so back to lessons, and I'm so psyched about this book because of the
Show 'em
lessons.
the cover. I love the cover.
Yeah,
Let's see
I
that cover.
held it up in the beginning.
Yes.
And I mean, it's such it's pretty. Like
The
it's
cover's
pretty.
so
The cover
nice.
is like so soft. It
Like
reminds me of those old school kind of velvet.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And we actually selected this photo, which is part of the photos at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. And the reason why we selected that photo is that Dr. King is smiling. And there are very few photos that I've seen of him where he's actually smiling.
In a genuine sort of
Yes,
inviting
yes,
in.
yes.
And so one of the other areas, so I read the Morehouse chapter, I think
Yeah.
it's 3 or
Yeah.
4. And as a Clark Atlanta alum, CAU, I read this chapter and thought it was fascinating to consider the lens through which the then student,
Right.
Martin King,
Right.
viewed Morehouse.
Yes.
Viewed the culture of
Yes.
Morehouse,
Yes.
viewed the leaders of
Yes.
Morehouse,
Yes.
but most particularly in relationship to the implications,
Yes.
right? Or rather, Dr. Reddick presents several descriptions of Martin's understanding of the educators and leaders at Morehouse, and one quote in particular stands out as he describes the first African American president of Morehouse. Now, we all know, those of us who are familiar with Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, that he was shady, and he was shady in many ways, right? But on page 83,
All right.
he is describing Dr. Hope, and he says that Dr. Hope is an American. So there was some question.
Yes.
If you all haven't seen a picture of Dr. Hope, please Google. Let's just say he was of a lighter hue,
Right.
with some European features, phenotypes.
Yeah, just a tad.
Yeah. and so Dr. Du Bois describes him as an American of Scotch descent
Yes.
who had somewhere among his ancestors a black man.
Yes.
That's shady.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so consider like how in the context
Yes.
of black
Yes.
intellect,
Yes.
right, or the intelligentsia,
Yes.
that Dr. Hope and his base at Morehouse, right, is beginning to manage how he's going to lead. What are some of the lessons that we get from that, in addition to his connection with Professor Archer and Professor Benjamin Brawley?
Yeah. I think Dr. King's time at Morehouse represents the golden years of historically black colleges and universities. And I think those golden years really did extend probably from that time period to the 1980s.
At least.
And it was a very exciting time. I mean, Morehouse was then, and no disrespect, was considered one of the probably top tier historically black colleges, along with Hampton, Howard, Fisk, Spelman, and
Atlanta University.
Oh, of course, Atlanta University. How could I forget Atlanta University?
How dare you.
That's right. That's right. Especially given my personal relationship with Atlanta University. But no, I mean, the men who, and they were men, who headed or led these colleges were intellectual giants. I mean, they were really the who's who among black intelligentsia. And so that's the company that Dr. King found himself. He referred to Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, another sort of intellectual giant, as his second father. And I think that admiration was mutual, because after the boycott, Morehouse College honored Dr. King, and Dr. Mays was effusive in his praise for Dr. King, who was barely 30, at the time. And it's terribly exciting. It's almost nostalgic to think about, what these schools produced, and where these graduates ended up, what role they played in not only American society, but internationally, because there were sons and daughters from the continent who had come and attended historically black schools, and then took those skills and that knowledge back to their countries in post-colonial Africa, and fulfilled various occupations within their country's government. So I mean, it was a terribly exciting time, and of course, Dr. King's dad was a Morehouse graduate. His brother was a Morehouse graduate. So it's a very important period, and I think
And
it was
his grandfather, right?
Yes, and very important period in Dr. King's life, a very formative period in Dr. King's life. I mean, he was relatively young when he started Morehouse.
He skipped his senior year of high school.
Right. And I remember Julian Bond telling this story because I think Julian Bond got to Morehouse. Yes, after Dr. King. But Dr. King was, he was so good that certain professors would allow him to teach their classes. And so Julian Bond happened to be in one of the classes that Dr. King taught. I think it was philosophy. And Julian Bond said he just wowed everybody. So,
So in chapter 8, we arrive in Montgomery.
Right.
That chapter is the decision in Montgomery, where Dr. Reddick explains Dr. King's true relationship
Right.
to the Montgomery bus boycott.
Right.
And in just a few paragraphs, he didn't spend a lot of time on it, but in just a few paragraphs, he dispels a lot of the myths around Dr. King's participation in that movement, and rightly so,
Right.
acknowledging those individuals or organizations that were basically leading, and saying Dr. King came alongside or followed in the leadership of those who were already doing the work.
Right.
So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Dr. King and Mrs. King arrived in Montgomery in 1954, shortly after the Brown v. Board decision. Dr. King came to Montgomery to be the new pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. An indication of how important Montgomery in that church was to his family. His son was named after the church. Dexter is named after Dexter Avenue Church. Dr. King's dad did not want him to
Right.
come to Montgomery. It wasn't about Dexter Church, it was about the city of Montgomery. I think it was also about the state of Alabama
Right.
that worried senior Martin King. But nevertheless, Dr. King came here, and there was already leadership in place, and Dr. King was selected for a couple of reasons. One, he was young. Two, he was well educated. Three, he was a virtual stranger to the white political structure in the city. And it didn't take long for people to realize that they made the right choice. I mean, his address at the Holt Street Baptist Church on the eve of the Montgomery bus boycott, in my mind, goes down as one of the best public addresses that anyone has ever given. And he only had about 20 minutes to prepare for that. But I think in just a few words, he crystallized what was at stake. And mind you, the boycott hadn't even begun. But basically, he said, you know, if we're wrong, the U.S. Constitution is wrong. You know, so, you know, and it sort of, it sort of struck a familiar chord or pattern with Dr. King's speeches, because one of the favorite speeches of his for me is the one that he delivered here in Montgomery at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, where he talked about the arc of the universe, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and that truth pressed the earth will rise again, no lie shall last forever. And then he quotes several stanzas of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, the song that Union soldiers used to sing when they captured Confederate cities. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. And so Dr. King was saying in no uncertain terms to Governor Wallace, who was peering through his Venetian blinds in the governor's office, you're going to lose this war just like you lost that other war.
Wow.
You know? And it was powerful. It was one of the most, to me, brilliant rhetorical speeches he had ever delivered. And you know, Dr. King, what I love about him is that he was very much a person. First of all, he was the son of Black Baptist preachers.
He really was.
He admired Black Baptist preachers, and you could tell that this kid, when he was a kid, had gone to these churches, and he listened to these men. He patterned some of his speaking styles after these preachers. A lot of what Dr. King delivered publicly was extemporaneous, and I could, you can tell that, he listened to the old men in the barbershop in his neighborhood or whatever. I mean, he really did soak in that culture. And
He did it for the culture.
yes, he did. Yes, he
Yes,
did.
yes, he truly did. Wow.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up in just a bit, but something extraordinary is happening today.
Yes.
Earlier we talked about the sacrifices that many made, losing their jobs, losing their lives.
Right.
And of course, if you're just joining us, we're broadcasting live from Alabama State University in the bookstore and the Student Center. We're here with Dr. Derryn Moten, and students from at then Alabama State College were expelled because of their participation in the nonviolent movement, all of the things that were happening in the city. And yesterday you sent to us a notice that the Montgomery city officials today have placed a resolution on the city council's agenda to address that matter. Can you
Yes.
tell us about that?
Yes, today is really exciting for those of us here at Alabama State University, because this afternoon at 5 p.m. the City Council for the City of Montgomery is going to consider a resolution essentially, among other things, acknowledging the city's role in the prosecution of students for their demonstrations in 1960, including the sit-in demonstration that took place at the Montgomery County Courthouse cafeteria. The sit-in demonstration here in Montgomery in February of 1960 was the first in Alabama. And as a result of that sit-in demonstration, there were 9 students that were expelled. 3 of those students are still alive. St. John Dixon, who is the namesake for the seminal or landmark case, St. John Dixon versus the Alabama State Board of Education, was decided in 1961. That case now requires that state-supported universities and colleges give students their due process before they can be expelled. What happened to the students in 1960 is that they were expelled without due process. They were expelled without knowing the charges that were brought against them. So the resolution today is to concede that the that the city was wrong, and that the city is seeking contrition from Alabama State College, Alabama State University now. And this follows another resolution that was done in May of this year by the Alabama State Board of Education, by then the interim state superintendent, Dr. Ed Richardson, where he expunged the records from the State Board of Education for the expulsions and for the students that were placed on probation, as well as for the termination of Dr. L.D. Reddick. And so, this is, one of those few instances where, in fact, to my knowledge, it may be the only instance where a State Board of Education, because there were other states that did similar, or took similar actions. This may be the only case where a State Board of Education has conceded that it was wrong and expunged the records of those students expelled. And so I hope this encourages people in Louisiana, in Kentucky, in Florida, and other places where students were also expelled, to force their states to concede that action was wrong. These students had every right within the federal constitution, or under the federal constitution, to protest against segregation. And it really didn't matter if Alabama's state laws supported segregation, those state laws were in violation of the federal Constitution. And if there is a conflict between the state constitution and the federal constitution supersedes.
Wow. This has been amazing. Absolutely amazing. We have had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Derryn Moten. Thank you so much for being our guest today, giving us
my pleasure.
an opportunity to talk with you. If you have not picked up your copy yet, please go out and get a copy of Crusader Without Violence by Dr. L.D. Reddick. The introduction is by Dr. Derryn Moten. You also have students, I think, who will be listening to this broadcast, if not now, a little later, and there's a challenge for the students in order for them to maybe get a copy of the book. Would you
Alabama
like
State University.
Let's be clear. Alabama State, let's be clear. Don't make any mistakes there. Don't come looking for me.
Alabama State University students.
Yes, Dr. Moten, please, to that point.
Oh, yes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pose a number of questions, and students, Alabama State University students who answer those questions correctly will get a signed copy of Crusader Without Violence, the 60th edition.
That's fantastic.
And that is really done through the cooperation of the ASU Bookstore and the Office of Student Affairs here at the university.
Dr. Davida
Yeah,
Haywood.
Davida.
Thank you, Dr. Haywood, for your
Yes,
support.
Thank you so much. Yeah. We thank the university for giving the Mommy Chronicles the opportunity to come to Alabama State University. Well, for me to come, because y'all already here. For me to come with my co-host, Denise Davis May, to have this broadcast in the bookstore, this very special occasion with Dr. Moten. And I understand this evening at 5, the Montgomery City Council will be having that meeting where they will bring up the conversation about the resolution. Absolutely significant. Remember, you heard it here first on the Mommy Chronicles. So go and participate in history.
Yes, absolutely.
This is wonderful.
Absolutely.
If you have any follow-up questions for us,
Yes, you can email us at mommychronicles2014@gmail.com. You can Facebook us at The Mommy Chronicles, and we are still on the Twitter at T Mommy Chronicles. So just stay in touch with us. You can respond to this live. You can go on our Facebook page and just let us know what you want to talk about. If you have any other books that we ought to be reviewing or having discussions about, particularly those that are related to community, related to the South, and to have direct impact on families and the structure of education, please do let us know. We are so excited to have met with Dr. Moten. Every time we sit down, we learn something new. Now I got to go review the Constitution.
so much work to do.
So that I can be clear about my rights. And so again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank y'all for joining us.
Yes.
I see all of those hands up, and we really appreciate your taking time. I see you, Catherine Fuller and Corey Savage. I can't see the folks that are above that, but thank y'all for joining. And I know that there was Cheyenne Kreisberg. I saw Timothy Irvin from here at Alabama State University in the marketing office.
Yes.
So thank you all for joining us, and we'll be sharing it later. But do share. When we share it. This is something that you really need to become familiar with. This story made so many connections for me to some of what we're experiencing now, some of the challenges that some of our young folks are managing, understanding how the state engages in some of, or I guess places barriers.
Yes.
In relationship to our practicing our rights, right? So do take note. It is available at New South Books, newsouthbooks.com. I think Amazon as well.
Yes.
Here at the bookstore, Books A Million. So please do. I mean, it's just a beautiful book. I've been rubbing it since I got it. So it is just a beautiful book and well done. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. You all have a wonderful day, and we will talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We'll be shutting off in a minute as we make our way.
Thanks for listening to the Mommy Chronicles with Denise Davis May and Tanya Scott Williams. Listen anytime on blogtalkradio.com/Mommy Chronicles. Do you have a show idea you'd like to share with us? Well, send it to us on Facebook, on Twitter, or email it to mommychronicles2014@gmail.com. The Mommy Chronicles, your partners in raising phenomenal children.